Oh my gosh, we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Lines at LunarCon. Faolain Hawk speaking. It's a pleasure to see you all. We had something like 60 viewers already. We got a slideshow here for you today. I'm here with Arden Talivere and Sarah Corehealer, my accomplices. 3 of 7 here today.
Partners
And
in crime.
yes, we do lots of lore crimes. Anyway, yeah, we're back. We were here last year. I believe who hosted our team last year? Was it Ayumi?
I want to say it was Ayumi.
Yes,
Yeah?
it was Ayumi.
Who else was there with us?
Ayumi, Cobra, and Meow.
Neela.
Was it Neela?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like a fun time. Well, I won't stall too much. Today we are talking about, as you see on the screen, the art of constructive retcon. Lore, world building, and fan fiction in Final Fantasy XIV. So I hope you enjoy, and we will proceed. So who are we? We are Lorelines. We've been together for, gosh, a year and a half now, I think.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
We've got about 62, 63 full length podcasts ranging from an hour and a half to 3 hours. We do our cast every Sunday from 2 to 3:30 p.m. Eastern. It's an absolute blast. We do get stuck on Aseans pretty often, but it's been a fun ride.
We do tend to be fangirls for them, as it were.
Yeah, so we're slightly Team Purple, but don't worry, we still love the planet and we want it to exist.
We love to hear Feel Think sometimes too.
Yeah, it's true. We do lore and theory videos as well. We've got a number of good ones. I was mentioning before we went live, my favorite 3 are probably our dear friend Cobran's Christmas comedy skit involving his full cosplay of La Habrea, talking to us about how he hopes we enjoy Endwalker. So it's an absolute. It's hilarious.
He's already planning the next one with the yesterday's patch art in mind.
It's so exciting. Yeah, we've already got wigs on order, so please have fun. It'll be coming soon. But we also do theory videos. Some of my favorites are the Shards, Dark and Light, and Is Hydaelyn Secretly Dark. All 3 of those go into, I said 2, but all 3 of those go into like the actual science that seems to be sitting behind the story. Things like the laws of thermodynamics. So very cool. You should check them out. We'll have links at the end. Comedy skits I already mentioned, and then very recently we started doing variety live streams. We are actually playing video games on stream multiple days a week. I wanted to touch on this really quick. I think Ayumi is just finishing up a full playthrough Assassin's Creed Odyssey.
Yeah, he actually just finished it, and they've also been doing Final Fantasy XIII and other like Final Fantasy games.
Yeah, so it's fun. You should stop by, hang out, enjoy the gameplay. And yeah, and also we've been starting to play with the community recently. So we ran in a Gaia run with a full pre-made 24 people just from the community a couple weeks ago, which was probably the funnest single event I've done in 3 months. So
absolutely,
if you're fortunate enough to die in my presence, I will res you with one of my famous Emet-Selch Raz macros.
Yes, those are great.
So I'll continue on ahead. I just did a lot of introduction, but the cast is Ayumi Kurogane, Faolain Hawk, myself, Cobran, Sarah Corehealer, Arden, Shadow Meowth, Neela, and actually this little guy here is our friend Soldier First Class, who's no longer doing content, but absolutely loved the Namazu, which was drawn out. All of this art was drawn out by Shadow Meowth. So
big friend of the cast, by the way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, big contributing factor to lore lines even becoming a thing.
That's so true. But anyway, we just want to go ahead and thank LunarCon for allowing us to have a spot. We know we are not the biggest content creator, but it's very exciting to be here, and we love going to these events. So hopefully we will be here as well next year. But in the meantime, thank you so much, Lunarcon, for the spot, and we'll go ahead with the presentation. So today we're going to be talking about two different subjects, basically. We're going to talk about retcons in the game, but also how we can use lore and world building when we do things like fan fiction. So, the first step is, what is retroactive continuity, positive retconning, and why does it matter? How have the writers of XIV used it? And how can we as fans also use the techniques we see them use? But first, the key recommendation for people wanting to write their own stories in universe: learn as much as possible about the existing canon. There is so much lore content in this game. Not all of it is written out in dialogue. Some of it you just see adventuring around the world, and I'll let Sarah speak on that a little bit later, but it is incredibly rich, surprisingly so when you look around.
I mean, it's a 10-year-old game, so it's not really that surprising. But
That's true.
Once you really get into the granularness of it, it can tend to be surprising, even to someone who's been playing the game as long as I have, for about 8 years. Like, I'm always learning new stuff.
I always liked everything from, like, Buscaron's Druthers, the pub in the South Shroud. I just love that environment. And, but when we got to the Heavensward era, just noticing that there were Allegan rings inside the Dragon Mountains was incredible. And you just miss it. You blitz by it, pulling a pack of mobs, and it's sitting right there.
Look up.
Yep.
But now that we have flying, you tend to look up more.
Yep. So, retroactive continuity, retconning, what is it? The definition, if you just do a quick web search, is a piece of new information that imposes a different interpretation on previously described events, typically used to facilitate a dramatic plot shift or account for an inconsistency. Sometimes this can be done artfully, sometimes it's done very inartfully. Fortunately, in our fandom here, we tend to have good ones, so that's a plus.
And even if they're not the best, they're still passable instead of catastrophic.
And they can also tend to lead towards positive outcomes and entertaining drama, rather than just like, oh, we just change things on a whim to make it easier for us.
And they can be a fantastic catalyst for creativity if you're an artist or a writer.
Absolutely.
I'm looking at the chat right now. Cobra with the Heidelin canonically smells like cabbage, thanks.
That's a reference to her creation of the Loporits.
Ever been in
Your mother smells like cabbages.
What? Mouth? Oh boy, we're gonna get off the rails.
Moving on.
All right. So, if you two could speak on what is positive retconning and why does it matter?
Did you wish to go first?
Sure. So, positive retconning, in my opinion, it often comes about when there's an inconsistency in the plot or something that the player character hasn't otherwise discovered. Which, in content like an MMO, that can be a little tricky because we often are shown things that the player character itself doesn't know, but we as players know. Which is something that I've found can be very difficult to keep track of in Final Fantasy XIV. But oftentimes when we get these retcons, we have to go back and reevaluate a lot of those scenes. And I think that's a very, what's the word I'm looking for? Brain. I lost it. See, this is why you guys shouldn't have let me drink before we started. I will just let you go,
I should have
Sarah.
sent you more.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, drinking more might have worked.
Perhaps a better example would be to consider Emerald Oath as one example of like when you have to go back like really far into something that may not be totally obvious to see an example of a retcon. Whoever's done Eureka may be aware that the story of Eureka as the Isle of Vol was something that was mentioned originally in 2.1, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it was real close after the finishing of the original story.
Right. And that what happened to the Baldessians and Galuf, Baldessian, and all the rest of them was that they had gotten into some relics and other things that had gotten the attention of an Asean named Emerald Oath. And we're not really, I don't remember if they ever specified their gender specifically, but I'm pretty sure she was trying to manipulate them and, like, neutralize them as a threat, basically. And they were like not having any of that. So part of the reason that they flung Eureka, what became Eureka, into the live stream and had it pop out in the Far East from where it had previously been near Charlayan. This was done by Galuf and the others in a sacrificial way to try and stop her from doing the various evil things that Aseans do with what they had stored in the Baldessian arsenal. Things like the Epitomus Eureka, the primal that was able to create weapons that can do all sorts of terrible things in the wrong hands. Now, the reason I think of this as a retcon is because during 2.3 or 2.4, I'm pretty sure 2.3, there was a scene in the Chrysalis with a meeting with most of the, if not all of the Aseans, including ones that we haven't really seen in any other context. And Emerald Oath was there, but given that 2.1 had already established that Eureka, or what became Eureka, with Emerald Oath on it, had been already by that point just disappeared.
We call it dunked.
And we remember, dunked into the live stream. And, Menphilia and Urianji were reacting visibly upset in the MSQ to this knowledge because they had a lot of friends and allies in the order. They were basically like wondering what had happened. What had happened is they had dunked themselves in the live stream and taken Emerald Oath with them. Kind of doing in macro what we had done later on with Nabrialis and the Orosite in micro to kill an Asean, like more permanently, or at least try to. So we don't necessarily seem to have a good connection between those two events, and it's very unlikely that a new Emerald Oath would have been replacing the old one. So that's just one example of, like, if you pay enough attention and you look at the continuity of even just time and the events as they're being presented to you sequentially, patch by patch or expansion by expansion, you can see that there are going to be some inconsistencies over a long period of time. I mean, it is a 10-year-old game. But on top of that, does that even really necessarily matter in the grand scheme of things that they went and retcon that later? To say Emerald Oath was completely fine, for example. Maybe it didn't work. Maybe they were able to avoid what Galuf and them were trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't necessarily negatively impact the story, but it is something to note. Whereas other retcons, particularly ones that might have to do with, say, tempering, and the concept of tempering might be more complicated and may lead to positive or negative retcons, depending on the situation.
I think that about covers that.
It's a good device to be able to review and correct errors and plot holes later on, but it is always a good idea to try and do that very carefully and sparingly as a writer.
So, how have the writers of 14 used it? We just discussed a few examples. I have a short list, relative to me anyway, a short list of retcons that we see throughout, specifically the most recent two expansions. So we'll go forward on these and see how much we can stretch that discussion out.
I would briefly mention that they did retcon a few things in previous expansions, but I would definitely say, and I think Arden would agree, that it was in the later expansions, after they had so much more established lore and potential errors or things they wanted to change, that Shadowbringers and especially Endwalker became expansions where we see a lot more of this happening.
And real quick, I just had a message in a DM. For those who are on Brynhilder, I know that Arden and Sarah are on server, I think. Where can we find you?
As well as Ayumi. Do you have the plot still? Let me look and see where we are.
Oh, if you're at the
we're in the
house?
lavender beds on Brynhilder.
Yeah, so we are by the main convention hall. We are at 10.5 by 14.1 currently. We moved away from the crowd a bit.
Yeah, just so we could breathe while we're doing the panel, as well as just to be a little bit away from having any potential performance issues.
Yeah. I'll do a quick shout if anyone is bad with coordinates like I am.
Yeah, we're just down the hill from where the main convention hall is.
What is the plot again? I should know this. But don't, because I'm a derp. Is it 2436?
See, we have a few people who found us anyway. I think, yeah, it is 2336.
Ward 23, plot 36.
2336. Thank you so much.
Everybody's welcome.
I'll see you
to
there.
hang out.
I'll see you there. It said 30 minutes. It lied. All right.
We've been trying to get onto Brynhilder all day.
It's been a bit
very
bonkers.
packed.
It's very exciting, though. One of the biggest retcons in the entire game, I think, is the astral umbral alignment switch that we learned of in Ilmeg and Shadowbringers. I should have put a picture of the
wheel that they had in Rianje's rooms in the shelves in Ilmeg.
I should have. I did not. But let me check that, and if you don't mind taking it away. But the question was, how big is this retcon, and why does it matter? So there's a narrative reason it matters?
There is definitely a narrative reason, but there's also a mechanical one. I don't know if Arden wants to take this one, or...
You start.
Okay. So, narratively speaking, this is more of like an emotional thing. For a long time, we associated umbral with darkness, because on the source, the umbral eras were marked by the arrival of calamities, things that the Aseans had engineered, things that were being done to serve their deity Zodiac, and therefore his embodiment of darkness. Things that, as a result of that, tended to become associated with great evils and losses of life, destruction, calamity, essentially. Whereas astral and more active times, like astronumble meaning stasis versus dynamic action, came to be associated with the light and with good things happening, periods of growth, periods of peace, or at least relative peace, and things that were promoted under the grace of Mother Heidelin, who represented the star, the world, essentially. On the first, they don't have any of those sorts of associations. They have no history of calamities other than the flood. And they associate the flood and light together as negative concepts relative to, for example, the Church of Light, which had preceded the flood and had seemed to have been, at least in Northrant and the areas of like Lakeland and Vobert, a prominent religion that venerated the light in a way not perhaps all that dissimilar to, say, if you've played World of Warcraft, how light has just kind of been like a I don't know, a very, like, you can project whatever you want onto it kind of deity, not something that's like given any other association is just a good thing. They associated the light with just a pure good, and then when it essentially ate most of their world and left them with terrible monsters that were trying to turn them into monsters and eat their faces, they decided they didn't really want any of that anymore, and the entire paradigm shifted in the direction of darkness being good, which we see most fulfilled in the religion of the Knights Blessed and their reverence for the sunless sea of the sky beyond the primordial light. So their understanding of the wheel was completely different from what existed on the source, and we can only imagine how that might be the case on the other shards that may still exist. But at least on the first, it made Urianger really raise his eyebrows up and decide to investigate and eventually come to the conclusion that we had it backwards and that the people of the first had it correct. That astral is an active element associated more with darkness, and that umbral is a stasis. It's connected to ice, it's connected to water and the slow flow of movement rather than things that are more active, like the wind or lightning or fire, things that are clearing away for the changing of the seasons, anything that might be dead. So,
Retconned. Nobody saw that.
No peering
nobody,
behind the veil.
yeah, no peering behind the veil. Um, so ultimately, when we got that revelation, it was a narrative one that was basically saying to us what Shadowbringers as a whole was trying to say to us, which is that darkness is complicated and so is light. They're not really one or the other. They're both working in tandem to keep the world functioning, which is also that mechanical element I mentioned, like literally elementally on an elemental fundamental level functioning. But also, they're giving us a sense that darkness can be good and light can be bad, that we should not assume positive intentions for the light and we shouldn't assume negative ones for the darkness. And that applies to the people who are most affected by those things, perhaps giving us reason to reconsider what Hydaelyn had meant to us versus Zodiark, or in terms of Zodiark, what the Aseans meant to us, framing what we would eventually discover regarding the Ancients, and also Hydaelyn and Zodiark and their summoning, why those things had been put into motion to begin with.
In a balanced natural world in this universe, with darkness and light operating correctly, light provides us with stability while darkness provides us with growth. That's why in the center of the wheel, we actually have the tree of life.
When all the elements are working in tandem and in harmony, life flourishes. When that is out of whack, that's when you see problems. And that applies just as much to people and what they do, and the war between light and darkness that came about from Hydaelyn and Zodiark, as it is anything to do with the actual function of the elements. Did you have anything to add, Arden?
Let's see. Jiraishi has a very good comment in chat. You mentioned they don't have intentions, but we later learned that their avatars have very clear intentions. How do we deal with that?
That's a very good question. And one that we'll maybe touch upon when it comes to Elidibus a bit more, in particular, when we go back to like talking about retcons a bit more, in terms of his character. But certainly we should try to like keep in mind that the elements themselves don't have intentions, but the people who summoned these primals, old and new, all of them have dreams and motivations and intentions. And so they're overlapping those things onto those elements and giving those elements a motive where otherwise they wouldn't have them. And then
Yes.
over a long enough period of time, they may not necessarily remember what those motivations were originally, which is most especially in the case of Elidibus, but also applies to a certain degree, the other Aseans for one reason or another, with maybe the exception of Emmett Selk. That they had a purpose in mind for Zodiark that would have perhaps evolved with time, but which was denied eventually by Hydaelyn and her purpose, and that the purposes that they were originally created for, first to stop the final days and then to stop the unremittent sacrifices of Zodiark and to sunder the world, to give everything a fresh start, and to hopefully with that affect a more permanent solution to the final days. Those things became sealed in stone to some extent. Like as long as those primals existed, as long as Vana and Elidibus existed and their primals, there would have still been this conflict between the two, the Warriors of Light and the Aseans. And that this would continue to play out on all the shards and especially on the source, irrespective of what the elements themselves really, meant in terms of like what they would be like without any interference from, mankind, so to speak. Be
Yeah,
it
because
ancient.
one of the best ways to look at the primals is etheric AI. Because they're elemental beings that have, someone's in the mech that basically becomes the intelligence within this creature. And because creation magics are just so swayed by, even just a stray thought, it makes sense that intentions have a very heavy influence on the resulting primal.
And then you come back to, for example, 5.3 and Y'shtola asking Elidibus, are you so certain that you speak with your own voice? Like asking, how much were those original intentions for salvation burned so fully into your psyche and your thought process, your decision making, that even all these millennia after Zodiark summoning, you're still playing out the same motivations for salvation without really understanding why in full anymore. Not really understanding that the world has moved on, it has changed, and that what you're doing isn't really the right thing to do.
So, moving on from the ethereal wheel, we actually that covered a lot of bases. Thank you very much.
Indeed.
That said, I don't know if we want to actually address some of these. I could just gloss through them.
We could kind of gloss through them, yeah.
Well,
I mean,
so
it is important to
we have
touch
the
on.
Aseans in general, right? At the very beginning of the
Right.
story, they're just basically chaotic evil. We don't have any reference point. We don't have any idea for motivations except for out of La
Yeah.
Habrea, and this like weird impish meddling going through the dungeons, and by the time most people got to the end of ARR, he was not even a mini boss, just a why is this phase exist at the end of Ultima Weapon. Thankfully, they just finished this change that changes our perspective on his relative power level. But that aside, just from the perspective of they just seem like they're evil bad guys, no real depth. That clearly changes throughout the expansions. So in general, we have character development that originally seemed rather surface level, coming into being very core to the story by the time we get to Endwalker, and even before.
Honestly, in some ways, the most motivation that we got for the Aseans prior to Shadowbringers was in ARR and a little bit in Heavensward when we got from La Habrea telling us about Hydaelyn being a parasite that was, draining the world dry and all these other things, like preventing the world from returning to some prior state.
And what did we learn here in Endwalker, right? At the end of the Itioscope, we learned that the crystal is a giant battery for the explicit purpose of getting to the end of the universe.
Yeah.
And this
So
whole
it was kind
time,
of
our
speaking.
mother Hydaelyn has been actually doing that. So
She has been siphoning energy off for that purpose
that's
as part
exactly
of her
correct.
plans
It's
to
just
help
nobody knew
us
the
at the
reason.
appointed hour, to fulfill a promise made another time in another place,
Yeah.
as she says in Endwalker. Beyond that, in 2.1, Elidibus also talks about how if we knew more, telling this to Minfilia, if we knew more about the Aseans, there would not be strife between the two groups. He was probably talking out his, what, a
Mm-hmm.
little bit with that kind of comment, but there was some truth to that, and it is something that also bears out in Shadowbringers a bit. We do tend to get a bit more empathy for them at the end. Even if we don't agree with what they were trying to do, we at least understand a bit better why they were trying to do it, which leads characters like Alize to say, had I been in their position, I may have done the same thing.
Yeah. Would we have done anything different? No, certainly not. That's the entire lesson of Shadowbringers. It's like, if you're losing everything, why wouldn't you give everything to have it back? It's the things we do for those we love.
And the things that you sacrifice about yourself along the way to the point where you stop being a hero and you become the villain.
Correct. This actually reminds me of, since we're discussing Shadowbringers themes here, the appeal Emet-Selch makes to us before we go to Mount Gulg, right? I dare say you would like it. He calls the people of the first half men. It's like, if we all knew truly that we were 1/14 of our proper existence and all of this was stolen from us, where would we fall in that question? And there has been a lot of, soul seeking on that question in the community, because it's a very serious, very deep question, and there's no simple answer. And simple moralities are hard to apply in this circumstance. It's nothing like real life. This is a different kind of beast.
The Scions certainly seem to come to the understanding that it was worth remembering and honoring what came before and trying to find common ground where possible, but that ultimately the world needed to move on, and the people that existed now were just as valid to be able to exist as those that they were descended from.
Fully
And
agree.
so they fought to protect that and that opportunity for the life that existed now to have a chance and to be unimpeded by any further calamities. That was part of what motivated Graha to do what he did with time skipping, which is another thing retcon related that we may get into in a moment. Um, Ultimately, moral questions aren't completely applicable to a fictional universe like this because of its metaphysics and things like the soul existing as like a tangible scientific thing that can be measured in this universe, but it is still important to try and reconsider one's views on heroes and villains in the context of these sorts of things. And that's part of what makes Shadowbringers and the whole story of 14 such a resonating thing with so many. It gives people a lot of opportunity for laughter and tears and soul searching of all kinds. And it really makes you think about a lot of things.
I think we can move on to the next slide. However, this is your opportunity to discuss Elidibus a little bit. I have a note here, our greatest admirer, but for entropy. And what I meant from that is basically memory loss.
Right. So Elidibus, especially in some of the short stories that came out during Tales of the Shadows and Shadowbringers, was very much presented as someone who admired the ancient version of the world of the Warrior of Light's soul, Azem the Traveler, someone who worked with them on the Convocation, someone who dissented over Zodiark and probably really, really broke his heart as a friend of theirs, like as someone that they looked up to, who at the 11th hour chose to turn their back on all of their brothers and sisters on the Order, including him, especially when he was so willing to be that ultimate sacrifice and be Zodiark's heart and just walk away. And so he didn't remember that for all sorts of reasons, mainly just in terms of just becoming a primal and having that dictate his entire existence and the passage of eras. But there was something that still lingered in him that we could see, especially in 5.2 and 5.3, that when he was in our presence again, it was stirring a lot of doubts and anxieties and just this feeling that he had had the world move beyond him. He was no longer needed, but he couldn't let go of his duty. He couldn't let go of a promise that he may even have made to us originally in that past life. And so, in a lot of ways, we were trying to give him peace, to give him an opportunity to move on to by putting him to rest.
I was really struck in those series of quests by the sense of if we could just speak, because the the player, I'm not saying the player character, but the player had so many secrets on hand, and Elidibus just says, essentially, there is no common ground. There's no purpose in speaking. We are just enemies. And then only after we manhandle him in Seat of Sacrifice do we finally, give him these memories back. And it's just tears.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, I mean, in Endwalker, he does acknowledge us a bit more, whether or not he really remembers us fully.
But he's ready for rest.
But he's ready for rest. It doesn't matter what we are now or what we were. At that point, he's just tired. He wants to sleep. He wants to go. And so, while Emmett was trying to find common ground in his own way, Elidibus was more determined to follow his path. But it would have been interesting, and this is actually something fanfic related too, is as just one example of an idea of something you can do with fanfic is exploring the question of if he had remembered or if he had had more desire to do what Emmett had done and engage with the Warrior of Light on their level, try to understand why they had done what they had done, why they had succeeded so much, what made them different. maybe uncovered a little bit more of that connection between the old and the new? What may have come from that? Would conflict have still remained inevitable? It's a question you can ask about a lot of villains in this game, not just Aseans. You can ask it about Yutsuyu. You can ask it about Varus or Xenos. You can ask it even about incidental villains in job quests. You can do anything on that front. It just requires examining and re-examining a little bit of the element of like empathy or understanding in a given situation.
So this, most of these topics could be podcasts in themselves, and actually we have had entire sessions on these.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
think Garlemald was a 3-session run just for the
It
MSQ.
was, yeah. And Garlemald in Endwalker is a deep and heavy subject matter, one
It
that's quite
is.
controversial in its own right.
Yeah, that's one of the funny things is we covered Garlemald before Endwalker, and it was 3 sessions. So if we were to go over it again, oh
Yeah.
boy.
Yeah, so we'll just gloss over this, but the slide I have here, obviously at the beginning of the story, we have Evil Empire takes down Alamigo, major sticking point. It's very Eorzea focused, right? So we see them just as, why are you here? In the level 46 through 50 quests, you kind of get some inkling that maybe the Black Wolf is onto something, but much like our struggle in Shadowbringers, it ultimately comes down to survival, and when it comes down to living or dying, the morality, the ethics don't really matter. It's who lives wins. That's essentially the game. So
the victor writes the tale.
We do some underhanded stuff to get the jump on them, then we raid the Praetorium, and that's over. But they were an expansionist empire, did a lot of bad stuff. That's the perspective. Throughout the game, a lot of that remains the same, but we start to understand that much of the structure of the empire, the major flaw of it, is that it depends on the particular ethics of the legatus in charge of a general, in charge of one of the legions. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
We have Gaius, who actually has a very good record in Alamigo as the what's the word they use? Is it
Something like that he
Star
had
Wars?
been
It's
someone who he was someone who tried to run that particular province as it became
yeah,
a little bit more justly than say what Yotsuyu was doing in Doma, for
correct.
example. Which isn't to say that he was, like all sunshine and
No,
rainbows or anything. He
no,
still did
he's still a
conscription,
might mate, right? That's his
and
ethics at that
he
point.
still employed people like Fordola's Crania Lupi, who regularly extorted the people for everything that they had. They allowed abuses to happen all the time, and that continued and perhaps intensified a lot under Xenos when he came in after Gaius. But there were things like Gaius saying, "No, I'm not going to engage in chemical warfare. I'm going to fight these people on my
He
terms."
canceled the Black Rose project.
Yeah,
So
people still did it under
correct.
his sight and behind his back, and especially in the Empire. Part of the things that ended up making him further disillusioned with what he had previously fought for. But at least under him, it was not something he wanted to engage in.
And also, we know that he adopted war orphans in a proper sense, treated them well. They thought of him as family. We got a couple psychopaths like is it Livia or Lucia? I keep getting them mixed up.
It's Livia, who was a complicated case.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Unlike
very
her sister.
complicated.
Unlike her sister Lucia, who we know from Ishgard,
Yeah.
who was a Frumentari who decided to defect
Yep.
after having experienced their culture and Emmerich sussing her out and offering her an alternative.
Yep. Became Emeric's second and has been loyal, stalwart, and honestly kind of a shining beacon of proper ethics.
In some sense, Livia ended up being the opposite because of Gaius, because in some sense, while he was taking on those war orphans, he may have been doing that primarily to have more Ratattans, more Neros, more Livias at his call in the future, doing
Absolutely.
what Roman legionaries became to their legatuses in real life, people who would be loyal to their legatus and their legion first rather
General
than the
first,
empire.
Empire second.
And that's something that we see a lot with Volans and with Gabranth in the story as well.
Valens is
These
such a creep. Ugh.
some of the essential chaos that Solus may have intended, that Emmett may have intended, or that just came about because of the Empire just giving powerful and ambitious people an avenue to having lots of people directly loyal to them. It was bound to cause a lot of problems, but it was also bound to create situations where you have varying degrees of oppression and the positive versus the negative that was on display in the Empire. Things like Message saying, the Empire gave me an education, gave me a way out of poverty, but they were still bastards, essentially.
Absolutely. Oh, just in case anybody wants to, Suya-chan is a joke. It's a joke. It's a joke. We know what she did in life, and only after losing her memory did she revert to what she could have been in life if it weren't for the horrors visited upon her by Doma itself and then the Empire. So, irredeemable, but very sad, and you wish for better. So that's why she's on this list. It's because, essentially, my last I just jumped to the next slide, but the bottom line is humanization of the characters, really embellishing them, adding historical facts that happened prior to our established story, retcons of that manner that really flesh out the characters.
I'd like to briefly touch on Yotsuyu. Just
Oh,
that
please go ahead.
Yotsuyu is a good example of the writing in this game being maybe not so good when it concerns female characters in particular and how they're handled, be they hero or villain, how they tend to end up dead or relegated to side content and have their storylines handled a bit poorly, which opens the door to retcons in its own way. But in particular, where it concerns her, they do kind of gloss over a lot of the stuff that she went through before she became the villain viceroy of Doma that we see, particularly in the patch series. I don't want to get into too much detail and get off of topic, but essentially that she's definitely a character that I think is also ripe for fan fiction as an alternative to her situation in the canon. Someone who does deserve a lot more attention and a lot more reconsidering outside the context of what they ended up doing with Tsukuyomi.
So, given that it's already 40 minutes into the cast, I'm not sure we're going to get through this. In fact, I'm fairly sure we're not.
We could
Did you want to
probably
touch
skip
change
over a little bit.
gears? I mean, this is all stuff that we're happy to rediscuss on the podcast itself. I've got Elpis
Yeah,
was
especially with the
multiple
rest of our
episodes.
hosts.
Why don't we hop over to the fanfic part of it then and just finish out that? Does that sound okay?
Yeah, sure.
All right, let me pop forward here. But yeah, as you can see, there's a lot in this game. It's not just a game, it seems. Good story.
It's a playable novel series.
It's a thing where you can create an OC, fall in love with them, like madly in love with them, and want to get so much art and writing done of them and role play as them and just on and on and on. Like people all over the world now, millions of people do that stuff every day with these characters, both their own and the ones that were given by the game.
So, roleplay and fan fiction. Why?
Because it's fun.
And because it helps us improve our writing.
Yeah, it's definitely been a great writing exercise.
Did you all want to touch on your writing at the moment?
You can go for that first, Arden.
I didn't hear what Faust said.
Would you like to talk about the fact that you are writers?
I would say that Arden especially is the writer here as a published author, but yes.
Well, you know.
Yes, so I have been writing since 2002. I started in fan fiction, and then I went into original works because back then I was like, why am I spending, 6 to 12 hours a day on fan fiction when I could be writing original worlds? So I ended up doing that for a while, but in the past year or so, I've gotten back into fan fiction with 14 to practice some of my skills. And that has been a great deal of fun. I'm thinking about getting back into RP. We'll see if that happens.
On my case, I've been working as a political scientist for the last few years, so I'm familiar with writing in an academic context. But back in 2020, after 5.3, I had essentially an epiphany, thanks to that particular story beat in 14, that was like, you should give this a try, fan fiction. Like, I had previously written a long time ago a little bit of like my own original work, things that I've more recently returned to, but I never could quite nail down what I wanted to do with it. I couldn't really find enough like passion and incentive in myself to just sit down and write and write and write and get better at it. When you engage with an existing world like this, though, and characters that you've really come to care about who are already characterized and you can work with them, give them a voice, have them interact with your character, it becomes a lot easier to just write, just sit down and write essentially, not have to worry about any of the setup, just write because it's all already there. You can just play with it. And so
Yeah.
that's what I ended up doing after 5.3 is I was like, I want to write stories with Emmett Selk, and so I have. And it has branched out from there to the point where I am constantly writing fan fiction now and doing a lot with what Arden did originally, while also now increasingly getting better at writing in an original context and working on a book.
Yeah, and I do also want to say 14 has been a great way for me to explore gender identity stuff because for the longest time I've only written uh cishet stuff in my original work. But last year I started being like, something's off. And with 14, I've been able to explore gender identity significantly more than I can in my day-to-day life, and that has been super helpful and also very good for brainworms for doing all of the writing. I have written probably 300 or 400,000 words of fanfic this year because brain go burr.
As a person who was partially inspired way back in Heaven's Word, in particular, to transition and become a woman, I also relate to that. This game is a great way to really have an opportunity to embody something different than what you may have assumed previously. And more recently, I've been able to explore those sorts of things further in the context of writing with my characters and with the characters of the game. And even just role playing with friends and partners of mine, being able to just ask questions and engage with the moral themes of this game. And even just things like, for example, ancients being able to do transformation forms and playing with ideas of like how would gender interact with something as fantastical as that, and how you can get creative with that in both a safe for work and maybe not so safe for work context.
So, with that, roleplay and fan fiction. How can we develop lore and expand a world without fully retconning the existing canon? So, this is from some stuff that Sarah had written out for us. But firstly, study as much of the existing canon as possible. And secondly, find things that speak to you personally. There are ruins, locales, temples, natural spaces, cultures, plot lines, organizations. I know I just read that off the screen, but it's the truth. There is so much depth to this world that finding an aspect of it that gives you a sense of belonging or passion or just interest is really helpful in this process.
Ishgard, in particular, would be, I think, one of the earliest and best examples. It is a completely fully fleshed out culture, society, religion, city, setting, like geographic, like locale, like Sea of Clouds, the Kurthus region, now shrouded in perpetual winter, the Thousand-Year War with Dragons, both before and after it ends, just on and on and on. Like, there's just so many things that you can really dig into granularly. Even something as small as the Scholasticate, or the organization of the Temple Knights, or the Broom and Hilda's Hounds. Being able to look at these characters, these organizations, and how they thread into the wider narrative and the wider society, or even just the wider element of like Eorzea as a geographical region with its own cultures. You can get really good at understanding Ishgard, and by doing that, you get a better grasp of its relationship with the wider world. And then you can gradually become better accustomed to understanding other parts of the world, like neighboring Gridania or Revenant's Toll and Mordona, how it affects their relationship with one another. the culture of the Ishgardians being at first very like frosty towards foreigners and those who don't worship Halone, but being able to go from that into writing whatever you want. Like if you write a fanfic work in Ishgard and develop it into a series over time, you may find yourself wanting to get out of Ishgard more. But you have that basis from having been in Ishgard with your characters and with the characters that are there to really be able to engage with the wider world on a much more firm footing. And then gradually come to understand by looking at those places nearby more and more of the world until eventually, given enough time, you have a much better appreciation for the game as a whole.
So continuing on, ask questions about the existing lore. How do people survive in their environment? As in Ishgard, it's very cold. What's the commerce like? What's the economy like? How do they get food? How do they get clothing? How do geography and climate affect culture? So we have Favnair now, and very different from an Ishgard, right? It's not just that it's warmer. I mean, there's different flora and fauna, different trade elements.
Sand everywhere.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, the best
Ishgard is very
spearfishing in the game,
much- Absolutely. Ishgard is very not trade friendly,
and yet
except for perhaps now.
they
now that
must
they've
get
opened up, but they
things.
must get things somewhere. Whereas in Thavnir, they thrive on being a mercantile empire to the point where their independence from the empire and from other powers depends on their ability to keep commerce flowing, to being able to resist piracy and bad luck as much as possible. And they have to survive on trade in part also because they're on an island, whereas Ishgard is on a landmass.
So when you're expanding your own fan fiction, excellent opportunities, right? There's a bajillion, right? But the list we have here, just for an example, obviously we have the ancients. We've got at least 12,000 years ago.
Again.
I'm cutting out again?
Yep.
I can take up from here.
Yeah, please go.
The ancients are a big one, especially now because they are the original like point from which everything else comes from. And there's a lot we don't know about them and probably never will, but one could easily take the starting points of Amaron and Elpis and just think about, say, for example, the ancient world being a world full of cities based on different human mythologies, not just the Greek ones that are referenced in Amaron and Elpis. And then considering how those cities may have interacted and how the world may have reflected the later sundered shards. Like, how would the geography back then have been like what we have now with, say, Eorzea or Northrend? Beyond that, we have the dragons, who are from outer space, which is already like an amazing idea. Just having dragons who are also aliens, who are also unsundered, they have their own language, they have a completely different way of understanding the world and communicating with each other. They reproduce asexually.
Oh, I've got one more detail.
Mm-hmm.
Let's not forget that they evolve based on what they do. Ishgard lore from the firmament.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
And also the idea of like they are able to influence the aether and blood of certain individuals over generations, as Nidhogg did with his curse on Ishgard after Ratatoskr's death and Hraesvelgr's eye being taken from him. Or rather, Nidhogg's eye being taken from him and Hraesvelgr giving his eye to Nidhogg.
Why are you still alive? Estinian says. Oh, his
nature.
eye's yellow.
Oh, that's a
Awkward.
bit awkward, huh?
We have both the eyes. Why are you alive? Oh no. We thought he was our best buddy, but actually he's enabled a 1,000-year war.
Another good fertile area for exploration, which is not as touched upon as much, but which still exists in the lore enough that you can really dig into it, is previous civilizations that came after the Sundering, but before the current era. And not just Alag, which is a big one, but like even things like Scala, which is underneath Alamigo, Silda, which is a ruin not that far away from Ul'dah, Nim, which is the ruins in Lanasia, Mach, which is in the Weeping City of Mach, also known as the Wiping City of Mach, where our friend Ozma is. and Amdapur, which is in the Shroud and has 2 dungeons dedicated to it. These ruins are all over the place, and especially in those last 2 examples, or last 3 examples, they dictated a lot of the lore and understanding behind what would eventually become the city states we know, and the forbidden magics of white magic, black magic, red magic, even to an extent, and the scholarly and summoning arts.
There's a lot there, and on Mach in particular, the region which we never go to outside of the raid is called the Yafaimi Saltmoor. And if you look on the map of Eorzea, you can read it. It's there in Eorzean script, but you can see the Saltmoor. It's a pretty big area, actually. It's probably comparable to one of the Dravanian forelands or the. It's big. It's bigger than you'd expect, and it's just a raid, but it's out there.
You can also look at Ronka, the Lakeland Elves, and Vobert on the first if you wanted to be a more first centric. Consider what life was like before the flood, after the flood, what really happened when Graha as Exarch arrived and offered these people, these refugees, an opportunity to rebuild their lives from the shadow of those failed civilizations, old and new.
Finally, there are ruins everywhere. Take advantage of them in your storytelling. Thanks in advance, Sarah and Arden, and my apologies for not spending as much time on this section as we intended, but thank you for letting us blitz through it, because I think we actually covered everything.
My only TDLR there would be, just to end off, is that don't be afraid to take a character, take a setting, take a civilization in this game, and just run with it. And especially where it concerns lore, it's a good guide, but feel free to also break it on your back. Do whatever you want. Make it something consistent, but make it something that you find enjoyable. And if you do that, you'll have a lot of fun writing and role playing. And you'll probably
Absolutely.
find a lot of people willing to engage with that as an audience and as role play partners.
Because just for a very, very quick TLDR example, I like to break the lore of Amarot a lot. I like to write alternate universes of, okay, what would have happened if the Sundering hadn't occurred? And it's a great way to exercise your brain noodle.
I do the same thing, absolutely. Or considering one of my favorite topics, what would have happened if the Warrior of Light had accepted instead of rejected, or even not had an option to become an Asean, if they had gone with Emmett Selk rather than becoming a Light Warden? Or if they had gone to Amarot alone rather than with the Scions? All sorts of potential situations and AUs that can come from that.
So our time slot is over in approximately 2 minutes, so I will thank our viewers for attending. Don't leave yet, though, because we have a few things, self-plugs here. So obviously we have a podcast. Our one of our hosts and our artist, Meowth, is looking for commissions actively all the time. She is a Spanish cat from Valencia and likes to do art. So if you like any of the drawn line art that you see in this presentation, it's all done by her, and she would like to buy bread tomorrow. So without saying too much more, please feel free.
Speaking of bread.
I was thinking that.
Bread for bread. Also, we have some links to Cobran and Kapalaka's shop. Kapalaka is Cobran's wife. You'll see in slides going, just coming up here, the kind of stuff that's available. So without further dilly-dallying, we've got a Twitter link. All of our handles are the same, LoreLinesXIV. We're on Twitter. We're on Twitch. We're on YouTube. We do restream.
We're everywhere.
We're on Discord. If you do anything today, we would love for you to join our Discord. And thank you for being part of our lore chattering community. We discuss stuff all the time. All topics are welcome, and the only caveat is bring mutual respect. So these are examples of artworks that Shadow Meowth has done for us. She has a Ko-Fi account, coffee account. ArtStation, DeviantArt. You can review the replay of this video to just get the the links if you missed them here. This is Cobran. One of our hosts does incredible cosplay, was actually recognized at a con, I believe, for the Estinian cosplay, but La Habrea might actually be his favorite and most often used. Kapalaka does art like this. We have a 3D render of Heidelin. We've got the mask that you see everywhere. She actually did the 3D render and sells the file. So those are her links, Isomo art. And then lastly, I think we've got Arden's V-card. So feel free to check this or screenshot it. And Neela's archive of your own fanfic account. So I guess with that, we will close and say thank you very much for watching our presentation. And my apologies for going 1 minute over to Lunarcon. But thank you so much for the slot. And I think we did a pretty good job. I would love to see you guys on the Discord and talk to you soon.
Come be fashionably late with us.
Yes.
I'll skip the outro because we're out of time. But once again, thank you, everybody. And I had a blast. So we'll talk to you.
Take care, everyone.
Goodbye.